Welcome to our season special episode. Every season I do this. I end my season and then I throw out one last kind of specialty episode. And I'm very excited about this one because we're going to be talking about disability, neurodiversity in the workplace, and some new kind of cool solutions that we have around those topics. And so I'm going to let my guest introduce herself today because I'm very excited to have her. I don't think I could have a more perfect person to discuss this with today. So, Cheri, take it away.
Hello, everybody. I'm Cheri Daughter. So I've been battling writing problems my entire life. Now, that doesn't say that when I was really, really young, that my handwriting was sloppy. Many times that's how dysgraphia starts, which is the disability in writing. Mine happened when I got into high school and then in college, where I just hit this capacity where I couldn't form the sentences. I couldn't form paragraphs. I would look at that blinking screen and not have any idea what to do next. Plus, articulating sentences and getting my point across was always difficult. So when I think about adults that are struggling, that's where my brain goes is
Right.
what are we doing to help people whose articulation, whether it's written or it's oral, are struggling to get their point across.
Right.
And I must say that I've been really studying this for the last 10 years. And it's taken me 10 years to really figure out what my point is, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I get what you mean. I do. And because there's so much out there when you're looking at disability and neurodiversity and all of this, there's so much out there to comb through and to go through, and there's so many holes in research. It gets very frustrating. So no, I know absolutely what you mean. And I see a lot of this in the workplace. I see a lot of leadership that gets frustrated with people that have quote trouble communicating and people whose communication is ineffective, so to speak, right? And so we see this a lot. This is a common issue. This is not uncommon. And a lot of people are like, yeah, I have that, but I don't have a diagnosis. And I'm like, yeah, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. So many doctors miss these things. Could you kind of talk to that point a little bit about the diagnosis issue?
Well, even to this day, nobody wants to diagnose it. So it's only something that even was on the radar of diagnoses within the last 20 years. And so before that, it wasn't even a known disability, if that makes any sense. So, I mean, when we're talking 15, 20 years and we're looking at the scheme of time, that's even smaller than a pinpoint.
Yeah, I know. It's like what? It's just this little like microbe in the
Yes,
span of time.
yes. This is very, very micro dot on top of the pinpoint, and so it's not something we understood. I would say that reading is a little bit more understood because
Yes.
there's been a little bit more in front of you research that's been going on.
Right.
There is research going on for writing issues. However, it's not been made more public, more
Right.
forefront. And
Right.
so it's not something that people hear about as often. But what research is showing and what every report that I look at when I look at a journal article, it's 33% of the population has a problem with writing.
Huh.
33%. That's
That's a
one
lot.
third.
Well, now I don't feel so bad because like I'm always my handwriting. It's not just that it's bad; it's like it trails off. And now some of this with me comes because of the seizures and the mini strokes. So that's part of what created this for me. My handwriting was always terrible, but the trailing off and my letters kind of like going wonky on me. That's that. But it is really interesting that it's 33%. Like you wouldn't think it's a full third of the population that has this issue.
Yeah. And you mentioned handwriting, but there's nothing in the DSM 5 that says that it's handwriting that's the
Right.
problem.
Right. It can be type. It can be all kinds of, there can be different, it's just written communication. And that's the other thing that scales off for me. So thank you for bringing that up. So it's interesting because sometimes I'm going along and then it's just, and this only happens to me when I'm having a seizure activity day. It doesn't happen other times. But when I'm having one of those days, it's like all of a sudden I'm typing, and then my brain just goes, eh. And something won't quite make sense, or I'll use the wrong word or something like that. So I always have to go back and double check.
I am so sorry. I hit a button.
You're okay. Nothing changed on this end. You're good.
Oh. Oh, where did you go? Are
I
you
don't
still there?
know. Yeah, we're seeing and hearing you.
You're seeing and hearing me? Well, you disappeared.
Okay, well, don't worry about it. You're still on there.
I'm still here. So I bumped the keyboard and all of a sudden one of my videos started talking. So if you heard that, please, I'm sorry about that. But if
No
you
worries.
heard then we can, I guess, I hope you can cut that out. But
No, it's okay. Don't worry about it.
That's not a word. It's not a big deal. But yeah. So one of the things I wanted to emphasize with the diagnosis, what the DSM-5 says, it's a disability in punctuation, capitalization, sentence structure, spelling, paragraph organization, and clarity.
Ooh, I want to ask a question about that. So all these people, all these years that we've thought, oh, they just didn't, they should go back to sixth grade or fourth grade or whatever it is because they don't know their capitalization, they don't know the sentence structure. That may not be it at all. It may not be a lack of education or a lack of understanding. It just may be that that's not how their brain works. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what you're hearing, because lack of education is also one of the qualifiers. So if you had, you lost my train of thought exactly the way I was going to put that sentence out there. So there you go. There's my oral communication piece, is that a lack of proficiency in the education is not a qualifier for the dysgraphia. So that if you have all those things, but you need to go back and get more education, you can do that, and then you can catch up.
Okay.
Some of the other parts of it, there is also this big list of what it doesn't qualify. And some of the things that are on that list, you go, huh. So it has nothing to do with visual or auditory disabilities.
Okay.
So they are separate.
Right.
Now, it has nothing to do with neurological disorders, psychological adversity, mental health disabilities. Those are all separate from the dysgraphia. So when I talk to people about this, and they're asking me, well, what about kids with ADHD and their handwriting is so bad and they can't bring it to the computer?
Right.
I say, because the ADHD is the driver.
Right.
The executive function is the issue. So if we have issues with executive function skills, and that needs to be taken care of first, because that is going to drive the writing disability.
Absolutely.
So Jim Rohn said that if you practice something 10,000 times, you will become an expert at it.
Right.
And based on that assumption, and when we look at dyslexia as well, if you practice reading, if you practice writing, if you practice math, and you practice where your disability and your weakness are, by practicing it, you're going to get better. I always had trouble playing the flute. You got fingering and stuff going on here, and the motor planning to do that. And I didn't take those 10,000 hours to learn how to play the flute, but I was bound and determined to overcome this disability. And that is one of the ways to overcome it, is to just dig
Practicing.
in and get around it. So for all of you that are listening that are adults with the disability, if you if it's just a writing disability,
Right.
practice. And I don't say rote practice. That's not what I'm talking about. Talking about, okay, take a question and try and come up with the answer. Now, I've got to say, AI has made the writing so much easier, because I will write, throw it into Chat GPT, let
Right.
it percolate a little bit, rewrite what Chat GPT says, put it back in there, and we go back and forth several times. I never take Chat GPT on the first try, though.
Right. 100%. First of all, yes to that. Yeah. Always play with it around a little bit more. It comes across very robotic otherwise. So
Mhm,
I want to hit on this too. So there are a lot of accommodations out there and different technologies that are being used
mhm,
to create accommodations, which is beautiful and wonderful. But uh, there's this feeling in the professional world that we're going to have, less understanding of the actual person if they're doing that. So for instance, if you use Chat GPT to do your resume, or if you use it to send a professional communication or to write a marketing blog or whatever it is, that we're losing that human touch and the connection to the human behind it. So what are some of the things that you would say to that? Like, what are some of your thoughts about that? And I'm not saying yay or nay to that. I'm just saying that's one of the kind of feelings circulating out there. So what are your thoughts about that?
I do better verbally having conversations. And so one of the ways that I was able to get around that, and I have embraced Zoom long before March of 2020.
Same.
I was using Zoom and other things, like we're using StreamYard right now. I have used that as well, and there's other technologies that are out there that you can use. I mentioned it a little bit ago, and that is, don't take what the AI says for granted.
Right.
Read through it, tweak it, put it back in there, and do a smaller segment. Reword this sentence for me, and just do
Mhm.
one sentence, not the whole thing. Now, I must say that I've always liked having a sample. It's
Okay.
always been helpful to have a sample of what I needed to write. Um,
Okay. So that's an accommodation that people could give, is to give a
mhm,
sample of, this is kind of what we're looking for. This is an example of the thing. So
yes.
what about when leadership is noticing an issue, or
Mhm.
a concern? They're seeing, hey, this is happening, and it's, causing some negative things. We need to fix it. What are your recommendations for bringing that up in terms of, from the perspective of somebody with the disability? What are some of the ways that you would like that to be addressed?
Mhm. So one of the ways that I utilize that service is I record the conversation with permission,
Hmm.
you know, recording the conversations. And sometimes if you're in a situation where it's a touchy situation, that recording needs to be used constructively and not detrimentally.
Okay.
So keeping that premise in mind is, we're doing it for constructive purposes. But I have found that recording my documentation orally and then transposing it to wherever it had to go was easier for me. And so one of the things that I've found is Otter AI.
Okay.
Otter AI creates an audio file and a transcription file for you. You can copy a bit of the text as as a text file. You can do all kinds of techno
Right.
arrangements with it. if you're doing video, there's some technologies that are out there. So I come from the world of healthcare. Back in the day when healthcare was not on computer, so we were writing our answers down on paper. So you could read, for the most part, you could read what I was trying to say. But there were times where the illegibility, and I must say, hormones have a lot to do with the illegibility for me. You were talking about
That, yeah, that could definitely affect things. Yeah.
Mhm. Was having one of those days. Yeah, the handwriting that day wasn't good. But as they were transitioning to computer based, and feeling like the only choices were the pull down menu,
Mhm.
and that I couldn't add more to it, that kind of constrained me a little bit. So having in those pull down menus places that you can freeform a little bit, uh, even though you have a sample, because
Okay.
all those pull downs are the sample. All those pull downs are the sample. It's it's nice to be able to also freeform your own.
Okay. So those are some good like accommodation type recommendations. So what about the conversation though? When you're the leader and you're like and you realize that something's happening with your employee, how do you start that conversation from and I mean I can give the HR side of this here in a second, but from the perspective of someone who's probably been on the receiving end of some of these conversations, how would
Mhm.
you like to see those conversations started?
Well, first of all, not um, have a conversation with them. How could so one of the questions that we're teaching the kids is, what do you see? What do you notice? How does it make you feel? What questions can you come up with? And tell me more about that.
Hmm.
So I finding a group of questions that are going to encourage conversation.
Okay, so the
It may
curiosity
not,
response, the curious kind of response, would that be?
yes.
Yeah.
So the idea of what do you see, what do you notice is we will put up images on the the smart board and ask the kids what they notice. It could be a number 8, a line, and a number 12. Well, if you're putting that up in kindergarten, they don't know that that's a fraction.
Right.
Okay. So it might be as simple as that. But as a player and you're looking back at documentation, what is it that you were what is it that you're understanding? Where is where's the gap?
Right.
What happened with me is as soon as somebody started asking me the questions, I would freeze.
Hmm.
So expect that to happen, that you would
Right.
freeze.
It's a it's a
Yes.
protection response. It's a defense.
Yes.
It's the fight. If people always say fight or flight, but they forget freeze. Freeze is also an option in there. So do be prepared for that.
Mm-hmm. So a way to approach the question is, does this answer that you put down on paper relate to what we were trying to get to as a company?
Right.
So how does is a lot less threatening
Mhm.
than why.
That's interesting. I wonder why. Because to me, and I'm always one of those people. I've always been told, stop asking why. Oh, stop being so antagonistic. I've been called antagonistic because I asked the question why, but it's trying to understand. And so one of the things that's always fascinated me is the study of how different words, the connotation, the denotation can match up, but the connotation makes such a difference. So do you think it's just that it's more of a social aspect of why sounds more accusatory? I'm just curious. This is just sorry. This is
Yes.
just my little
No.
neurodiverse brain going down a trail.
No, and it's a good one to go down. It's good to elaborate on it. So Daniel Pink has done some study on workplace communication, and he identifies that autonomy is one of the things that will empower an employee.
Okay.
And his way of getting empowerment from an employee and getting that autonomy to come shining through, he discovered how does was the best question.
I like that. I like that. That is really cool. Thank you. So I think that kind of ties into, so when I was little, so I'm a terrible artist. Like my drawing, they're just tragic. Even when I went to art school, it was just, or went to art classes, it was just bad. And when I was little, I would bring my pictures to my mother, and instead of saying, "What is this?" Like, oh God, because she never wanted me to feel self-conscious, she would say, "Tell me about this." Tell me.
Bingo!
Yeah.
Bingo!
And it was the best opportunity to just come out and just be like, hey, this is the thing that it is. Because then she could respond to what I intended it to be, not just the weird disaster that was on the paper. So I think it's the same kind of psychology.
Yeah. So tell me about is one of the things that John Lee and I talk about in our latest book, which is all about math intervention. And so tell me about 8, a line, and 12. We'll go back to that same fraction again. You're in kindergarten right now. Just imagine yourself in kindergarten right now. What is in front of you? The number 8. Hey, there's a number 12. Hey, there's a line in the middle, but I don't know why there's a line there. That's simplistic, but the same thing happens to an adult when they're trying to figure something out. So imagine yourself, you just got the box in the mail and you've got to put together the bookshelf or the whatever. You got to go through and you got to figure out those pictures. Even sometimes the pictures are difficult to understand.
That is so true. They need to work on their illustrations. It's not good. It looks like I did it half the time. It's not good. Like, who came up with this?
So looking at it, so tell me about that. And my son will say, well, why didn't you understand that? And I'll go, because I didn't. So one of the things he says to me all the time is, did you Google it? I'm like,
to be fair, we do have, but what's funny? A lot of us didn't grow up with that, right? So Googling only became a thing kind of like, I think maybe by my senior year, maybe. I don't, yeah. So yeah, for him, it's like, oh, well, clearly this is what you do, Mom. But for a lot of adults, we forget that that's not always been a thing. So it's not necessarily a habit. Now I've made it a habit since then. Now I'm constantly researching and Googling things. Yeah. But it's not always a habit for people. So we do have to kind of take that reminder of, did you take the steps to do the things to learn? Kind of back to that self-responsibility too, of taking the time to learn it and to create the habits.
So using that idea of the habit and understanding that some people learn auditorily wise, YouTube has so much out there.
Yes.
So YouTube is a great training tool. As a matter of fact, that's how my son has created a business for himself. He has learned on YouTube.
There you go. See, it works. I literally changed a head gasket on my car using YouTube. And I have no mechanical experience.
You do know my husband's a car collector.
Oh, well, there you go. So see,
but we're not talking about cars.
No, we're not doing that. But I did, and to your point though, YouTube was such a great resource, and the video was so specific that I could go through, see I'm very visual. So for me, it was the visual element. I needed to see where it is, what does it look like, why is this happening, and go through it and mess with it accordingly. And you have to consider the different learning styles too. And that's the thing that we miss a lot, both with children and with adults, is missing of the communication styles and missing of the learning styles. And one of the most fascinating kind of phenomenon to me that we skip over is the way that we have this idea that everybody receives things the same way that we do, right? So a while back, as an example, I saw a post that said, give somebody a hug, it'll make their day better. I'm like, please, God, do not do that. A lot of people do not want to be hugged. Ask a person. Now, if you know the person, you know they do, that's fine. But if you come up and hug me, I'm going to be like, why? What is happening? I don't like it. Why are you touching me? What is happening in my world right now?
And I'm
And
the other way is I give hugs to everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're a new person on my life or you've been here forever.
and
So I'm a
that's
hugger.
okay too, but it's the difference. But that's the perfect example of it's different between different humans. So how is this going to be received? Is it a relaxing thing? Is it an exciting thing? Because for some people they get so excited about hugs. Is it like a recoil, type of response? And it's the same thing with communication and words used. So for instance, to a lot of people, saying mental illness is not bad or detrimental. There are a lot of people, however, who remember when that term was used to lock you away or to shut you out or to, and so it's scary to some people.
Mhm.
And so it's just, you have to consider the different
Yeah.
humans out there and how they're processing. This is why, and I want to get your take on this. One of my new big kicks when it comes to leadership and people operations and all of this is that these folks in these positions of leadership and HR, et cetera, because they have chosen to take on a career that involves taking care of other humans, need to become experts in communication styles, learning styles, et cetera. Because I think that's just common sense when you have to take care of so many different people. What do you think?
Yeah. It's very interesting. I was at a college job fair on Wednesday. The university that I participate as a spark incubator um, for the for the students, um, they had a job fair, and I had texted the director, and I said, "Is there going to be any schools there?" And she's like, "I don't think so." But I went down anyway, and it turned out there were two schools, and the local extended school center
Okay.
was there as well. So there were three that were immediately directly to my
Right.
needs. But um, it's very interesting when I was asking some of the other organizations, do your employees write? What do you mean, do they write? Well, how many of your employees have to write reports after an event happens and stuff like that? Some of them it was no.
Yeah.
We do have a battery manufacturer, Deca,
Mm.
in my area. So think about that. You're a battery uh, thing. You're on the factory line, and you're doing. You don't. There's not
Yeah,
much
that's not a
that
thing.
you have to
Yeah.
worry about. But their supervisors need to sit and write things, and then there's a
Yeah.
supervisor who has to read that report. And it was very interesting hearing some of the conversations with some of these organizations where they had no idea. And then I stopped at the police academy stand, right? And I'm talking to the one gentleman, and he's like, I, yeah, I do notice that every once in a while that some of these people do struggle with getting their
Hmm.
reports in. And I walk away, and he calls me back. And he's like, "You're never going to believe this." So this is one of those things that you don't know what to expect
Right.
when you're talking to somebody. His wife is on school board at a local school district. He's like, "They need this because they are so behind the times. Oh my gosh, you are a wealth of information. I couldn't believe how much I learned just from talking to you.
Yeah.
The reason my wife is on school board is because our son had dysgraphia.
Mm. Interesting. There
And
you
now
go.
he's an adult in college and struggling. Um, so it kind of like just keeps following you through life.
Yeah.
And I want to circle back to something before I forget it. And we were talking a little bit about learning disabilities. I always struggled with getting through a book.
Hmm.
Didn't matter whether it was a novel or not. I want you to think back about 20 years
Hmm.
before The Lord of the Rings really got popular,
Yeah.
when you cut all 3 books into one little
Yep. Hmm.
book. Remember how small the type was?
Oh yeah. Teeny tiny. Teeny, teeny tiny.
Teeny tiny. That is one thing I wanna say, is teeny tiny isn't going to be good for somebody wearing glasses.
That's true.
You the smallest font that you should type on any documentation is 12. The average is 14. If you want to get away with it, you can do some 10s, but that cannot be the primary font size.
Right.
So if you really are looking at HR stuff and communication, is it big enough that the person can read it?
Right.
And that might be even where you have to start back is
What a novel idea. Make
see
it so
it.
that people can read your communication.
Can they
I
even
love
see?
that. That is a great like final tip for the show. It's like make it so people can read your stuff. Super helpful.
I do have one more though, and
Okay.
that is I found it, and the reason I was bringing up this point, not just for the font size, but I found it much easier to have an audio file and the visual in front of me and seeing both at the same time. So if you can record whatever it is that you are trying to
Mm,
educate your staff, have an audio recording and a video. That's what makes PowerPoints so much better than
right.
way things were when I was going
Right.
through stuff.
And there
Because
are apps, by the way, that can do that as well, that your employees can have that will take things from text to audio and audio to text. And that those are very helpful. And I highly, highly recommend having those readily available for your team. So thank you so very much, Cheri, for joining us. Tell everybody where they can find you.
Oh, right there in front of you is my name, and my website is cheri.com.
Wonderful. There you go. And thank you again so very much. You've been a wealth of knowledge. Everybody, just remember that sometimes these things that we take for granted or that we don't see as being such a big problem can be a struggle for everybody else. So think inclusively, design universally, and remember that not all writing disabilities have to do with just your handwriting. So thank you again, Cheri.